I come from a user experience perspective. I've spent most of my career at the interface between the human user and technical artifacts, and something that has instilled in me and that I've been marinated in is a concern for the ordinary, everyday, non-specialist person as they engage technical artifacts of a variety of types. Generally networked informational technological artifacts, websites, mobile devices, situated network kiosks, and increasingly the class of technologies that we think of as ubiquitous computing. I've spent over a decade in this field, most recently as head of design direction for service and user interface design at Nokia, and now as managing director of my own shop, a company called Urban Scale operating out of New York. What I want to talk about today is openness in a completely different context. Openness in the context of objects which exist in our cities, which will continue to exist, will take up an ever more dominant role in determining the shape of our cities and what kinds of experiences can be had there. And what openness might mean in the context of these objects that exist in public space, that are capable of gathering data, displaying data, processing data, and taking physical action on data. So the talk is called On Public Objects, Connected Things and Collective Resources in the Networked City. And it's very much in the nature of a diagnosis and a manifesto. It is very much a contentious viewpoint, an anticipatory viewpoint, and pretty far to one end of a spectrum of contention about the potential shape of these systems and what role they might play in public life. And where I'm going to start with is with IPv4, Internet Profile version 4. As we are all familiar with, the Internet is brought to us by a series of protocols that are arranged in a hierarchical stack. At the network layer, at the base of this stack, is a protocol called Internet Protocol, which determines the number of nodes, the number of addresses that you can have on the Internet. The salient feature of the current version of Internet Protocol for our purposes is simply that it's running out of space. By the end of next year, it's anticipated that there will be no more addresses available in IPv4. So the Internet Engineering Task Force, the people who determine these protocols and give shape to the network and all the experiences that we're able to have there, came up with a solution and tried to solve this problem forever and a day, something called IPv6, the next version of the Internet Protocol. I have no idea why there was no IPv5. It's never existed. It has no meaning. The salient feature of IPv6 is that it has 128-bit address space. It has truly abyssal reaches of namespace, 3.4 times 10 to the 38th addresses in IPv6. Which, even given the allocation of a significant amount of those address blocks for housekeeping, means that every grain of sand on the planet could have on the order of 1 million addresses and have plenty left over for anything you could conceivably want to do. And there's something interesting about that kind of extraordinarily deep namespace, which is that it tends to want to be filled. It tends to want us to fill it. Opening up the prospect of rendering everything in the built environment addressable, giving everything in the built environment an internet node of its very own, a unique identifier, a unique address, and a way to communicate with other objects on the network. And I do mean everything. This is an image from one of Michel Turan's workshops a couple of years ago where they went through cities and they looked at communicating objects in network space. Apparently, something beneath this manhole cover is responding in radio frequency. It has some kind of RF tag associated with it. It's transmitting in Hertzian space. It's a networked object. It has an address. The most interesting thing about objects that have addresses, for our point of view, is that you can draw information off of those objects. You can query them. You can pull information about their current state off of them. And you can potentially even push back information about prospective changes of state and instructions as to the future change of state of that object. Objects become scriptable. So the Gartner research firm estimates that by year-end 2012, up to 20% of non-video internet traffic will be generated by networked objects and sensors that are embedded in the built environment. generating a truly torrential amount of information on a very, very wide variety of channels of a wide variety of types in every city in the developed world and most of the post-urban complexes that are sprawled all over the planet that are not traditionally considered part of the ubiquitous computing worldview. Places like Lagos, Nigeria, are also showing up in the network in densities and coverage that begins to approach anything that we've associated with the developed world so far. What you see on screen right now is an image of a really interesting project of this city. It's called intheair.es. It was something that I saw at Media Lab Prado a couple of years ago, where air quality stations distributed throughout the city are treated as networked objects, and all of the information that they generate is to air quality, particulate counts, carbon dioxide concentrations, wind direction. All of these things can be pulled off of them in something approaching real time. When you can apply IPv6 addresses to objects in networked space as well, we invite onto the stage entirely new classes of urban actors. This is a project of Tom Armitage in London. He, at first whimsically and later on seriously, decided to endow London's Tower Bridge with a Twitter account of its own. As a sort of a way of anticipating what a truly, fully, robustly networked object in the city might look like. With the Twitter account, Tower Bridge is able to report on its current status. It's able to report in natural language, things like, I'm open right now because there's a ship passing beneath me. I'm about to close. I'm closed right now. And Tom takes this as sort of a stand-in for a very, very wide range of circumstances and artifacts in our cities that will begin very soon, if they haven't already, to begin actively reporting what their current condition is, how we may use them, what we're going to... It's a way of seeing around corners and down alleys and corridors and across space and time, allowing the urban fabric itself to begin to communicate with us. Obviously, utilitarian uses are not the only things these sorts of systems get put to. Advertising agencies have been among the very first to make use of the new capacity of space to gather information, display it, process it, and act upon it. This is an advertisement in the subway system in Seoul, Korea, where there have been load cells embedded in the carpet, which is obviously temporarily in this space. You could just as easily put load sensors in permanently, embed them in the surface below that. And the gimmick here is obviously that, as you walk down the red carpet and the motion detectors pick you up, the paparazzi in the picture swivel towards you and take your picture, and the conceit is obviously that you are the celebrity, and this is what it's like to be stalked by a paparazzi. I'm not exactly clear how this is supposed to function in support of Nikon's mission to sell cameras. I personally would find this sort of an obnoxious experience, but nevertheless, it's clear that these systems are getting turned to all kinds of uses. This is not, to my mind, at all a neutral thing. As far back as the mid-'90s, Georgia Tech had demonstrated that our gait period, the rhythm of our footfalls as we move through space, functions to something like an 80% reliability index as a unique biometric signature. If you can combine that with other sorts of biometric identifiers, you can very, very quickly be able to specify unique individuals as they move through space from nothing more than the rhythm of their footfalls on that carpet or the other sensor networks that are embedded in public space. So I begin to be concerned about the use of this information, who's gathering it, how you get access to it, what they intend to do with it. And most especially in this context, this is a screenshot from a French service. It's a company called Kividi. They sell a surveillance and data analytics package for advertising and placement. So there is a camera that is embedded in the frame of a billboard. The camera is of the order of the camera that's in a cell phone. It's very small. It's very hard to see. The camera records images of all of the people who pass in front of a billboard and is able to do some, the software package, the analytics package behind the imagery, is able to do some pretty interesting and some pretty impressive things. Kividi claims to be able to analyze and identify The composition of audiences by demographic and even by psychographic. So they can, in this instance, they can obviously do breakdowns by gender. They can do breakdowns by age in 4 age bands. They can do analysis of facial bone structure to make some inference about ethnicity of the audience. And by measuring the luminance of reflections off of eyeballs, they claim to be able to tell whether you're paying attention to their ad or not. So what's problematic about this for me is simply that somebody is deriving significant value from my use of public space. Whether, when I walk in front of a billboard that has been endowed with this capability, I'm generating value for somebody. And I'm generating value for them whether or not I'm aware of it, whether or not my consent has been acquired. Even if I don't pay attention at all to the image that's on the billboard, even if I'm simply walking by it, I'm generating value for them because, a false, a negative finding is still a data point for them. So somebody is deriving value from this embedding of data collection in public space. And what begins to concern me is that as practice, as law, as a jurisprudential system, we haven't really yet in any civilization or society that I'm aware of begun to wrestle with the implications of this and begun to assess how we secure the value that's generated for the people who are, after all, generating it in the first place, the general public. What I argue is that we have to begin to reframe data collecting objects in public space as something that I think of as a public object and reclaim it as a shared resource. So what is a public object? I have a couple of different definitions that I use that taken together are sort of, they begin to approach being comprehensive enough to be useful. From my perspective, a public object is any discrete object in the common spatial domain that's intended for the use and enjoyment of the general public. And in this context, use and enjoyment is a term of art from the Anglo-American jurisprudential tradition. We talk about rights of use and enjoyment in the law. So anything that is there, that is available to be utilized and taken advantage of by the general public, in this context, I would consider to be a public object. More pragmatically, maybe I would just think of it also as an artifact located in or bounding upon public rights of way. Anything that faces onto a right of way that people move through on a regular basis in public space, or any discrete object which is de facto shared by and accessible to the public, regardless of its ownership or original intention. So I would begin to push into places like malls and what are increasingly being thought of as privatized commons and argue that data collecting artifacts in those spaces are de facto public objects, even if they're on private property, even if they're owned by private parties. And here we get to my definition of openness, because I have a very specific and technically and legally bounded meaning of open that I use in this context. If we're going to talk about open public objects, what I mean is that the ability to draw information off of them or to push information back to them comes through an API that is whose specifications are published, open, and available. We discussed APIs briefly yesterday. Again, an API is an application programming interface, which is a conduit by way of which a software or technical system communicates information to other systems. In software development, in software engineering generally, an API is considered open, like the Google Maps API, if all of its specifications and provisions are available to the public, are published openly. So that's the first condition. I also mean that open objects offer the public and anybody who wants to take advantage of them read and, where advisable, write privileges. So obviously, a data collection object in public space, you should be able to read off of that without having any particular privilege or any particular credential. You should be able to read its current state. And where advisable, and this is sort of a touchy subject, you should be able to push instructions back to those objects. And the reason it's a touchy subject may or may not be obvious, but I just want to make it explicit. Obviously, if you've got something like a street light system, traffic signals, you don't necessarily want to give all and sundry the ability to push instructions back to those things. That would be obviously abused very, very quickly on a case-by-case basis. But also, the term of art is attack surface. Any network, the greater the degree of nodes it has, the open access points it has, it increases what's called the attack surface, its vulnerability to exploitation and corruption. And so the more right privileges that you're going to distribute in the world, obviously the more vulnerable any of these systems are to disruption. At the urban scale, these are very, very sensitive networks. These are very sensitive systems. So it's not always going to make sense to offer right privileges to all and sundry. But I think that the case is strong for read privileges and where necessary and under certain specified circumstances, right privileges as well. And finally, some terms of art from economics. Wherever possible, I mean for open public object resources to be non-rivalrous and non-excludable. Non-rivalrous just means that my use of it doesn't preclude your or any other use of it, and non-excludable means that there's no way to constrain the benefits that are produced by the system to solely people who have paid for access to it, so that the benefits are equally available to all in public. Conceived of this way, we have I would say, a generational opportunity to transform the urban fabric itself into a continuous fabric of informational resources, to let the city itself speak to the presence and nature of local resources, and open them up for repurposing and reuse in some ways that speak very deeply to issues of sustainability, social justice, just enhanced efficiency of resource utilization. And I'll give you a use case, a good example of this. Why are we in this room today? Why are we in this room right at this moment? Mightn't there have been another more convenient room in the city that had Wi-Fi, that had conference table and a projector and was wired for video? And isn't it probably the case that there are many rooms like this in this city at this very moment that are going underutilized, that the city is probably over-provided with the capacity for this kind of thing? Couldn't you have a much more efficient use of urban space in the urban environment if all such resources were identified, were characterized, were made available as network objects, as open public objects as we've described them? And this is explicitly the value proposition of a very interesting project by an architectural firm in Japan, Atelier Hitoshi Abe, a project called Megahouse, where spaces, resources, artifacts of all sorts, from conference spaces to spare bed capacity, are made identified to the network, have a very attractive interface published for them, and then people are able to sign up for these resources, utilize them, and claim them using a biometric signature. The limitation of Megahouse, I think Megahouse is a super interesting project. It points towards a light way of living in the city that's enabled by this sort of technological infrastructure that's been deployed at significant trouble and expense, and yet affords what I think of as this very light quality of living in the city, where you're constantly mobile and you're able to take up resources as you need them, very much in the flow of everyday life. The limitation of Megahouse as it's currently conceived, though, is that it's almost purely a commercial play. The way that they conceive of these services is that you would be renting out spaces, you would be renting out resources. And I have nothing against the attempt to derive revenue from the utilization of capacity like that. I personally, if you feel like doing that and charging money for it, and you're able to find an audience and a market for those sorts of services, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But that feels sort of sad and partial and limited to me. And so my conception is a little bit broader. There's no reason why there can't be market and non-market services made available for a framework like this. They're not mutually inconsistent. There's no reason why you can't open up the space of the city in general for paid and non-paid uses, and conceive of the entire urban fabric as a set of collective resources there to be taken up and used by whoever needs them. The result, in the long run, I hope, would be a city that's consciously composed of such resources. This is certainly the thought behind projects like the Breakout Festival, which attempts to turn Wi-Fi-equipped public spaces into co-working laboratories, that turns the city itself into an office, into a collective, collaborative, co-working environment that takes maximum use of all of the networked infrastructure that's available, and uses it to rethink what work looks like in its spatial and social dimensions. Taken together, projects like Breakout and Megahouse are very, very exciting to me because they suggest potential directions for open network resources as platforms and enabling infrastructures for all sorts of social public activities that really begin to reimagine private life, public life, social life, the ways in which we work collectively and individually, in ways that I think are a lot lighter, more congenial, less resource intensive, and probably a whole lot more fun. Ultimately, I also believe that network resources conceived this way can be social objects and social hinges that connect currently mutually incommunicating communities to one another, that function as bridges and hinges between individuals and groups that currently have very little reason to be in touch with one another or to share viewpoints or diverging viewpoints, that they can function as nodes of potential mutuality and solidarity in spaces that are very, very badly in need of these qualities. In the end, I want to suggest, however, that it's not, again, the technical possibilities that are as nearly as interesting to me as what we do with them. And in this context, there's a quote from a friend of mine that I like to roll out that I think is relevant. He's speaking about a slightly different subject. He's speaking about open public data. But the point is sound, and the point remains. He says, I don't care so much about making the data public. I care about the public making the data. This is a guy named Usman Haq, the founder of Patch Bay, which is sort of an enabling infrastructure for networked artifacts of all types. I hope that I've done a reasonable job of representing the state of the art in open networked data collection and processing and actuating artifacts, and suggested a little bit of something about how we could use them to rebuild our cities and even rethink some of the social arrangements that we take for granted and have lived with as fait accompli and as given so far. I'm personally very excited about this domain, and it's where I'm going to be working probably for the remainder of my professional career. I think that there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done in this area in terms of characterizing these artifacts, in terms of doing the hard thinking about how they exist jurisprudentially, economically, socially, publicly, and in bringing pressure to bear on the regulatory community and government bodies at all levels to ensure that what I've defined here as openness is part and parcel of these systems and artifacts and remains so into the foreseeable future. So that's my thoughts on the subject. Thank you very much.